Okay, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. And as per normal, I will go ahead and start out with the news of the week here. And one of the items that I found in the news this week is something that just sort of reinforced to me how everything is going mainstream with solar and EV charging, for example. And Wallbox has announced that they're going to start selling EV chargers at Costco. The particular one that they're going to be marketing there is the Pulsar Plus. It's a 40 amp system, level 2 charging station. It is one considered smart, a smart charging station. It's voice activated. You can work it through Alexa. It will balance your loads. So, for example, what they're claiming is this kind of technology avoids the need to put in larger amperage in your system. It'll say, okay, what are we dealing with? And then it's going to reduce or increase based on capacity that's available. These things sell for about $600 to $650. So we're starting to see that distributed through normal channels. President Biden attended an announcement on July 6th from Enphase that they've begun shipping their product domestically manufactured. So this is from their South Carolina plant. And what they're doing is, of course, trying to take advantage of the 10% incentives from the Inflation Reduction Act. So what we're beginning to see is a lot of these panel manufacturers and, of course, inverter manufacturers are opening up plants in the United States to take advantage of that. The South Carolina plants will be producing the IQ8 series. They state that once it's fully operational, it's going to be producing about 18 million of these each year and employ about 600 people there. There was a recent auction of federal lands for solar arrays, and the U.S. government raised about $105 million by auctioning off about 23,000 acres in the Nevada deserts. Nevada Energy paid about $80 million for the rights to put solar arrays on public lands. Next Era Energy Resource paid $25 million. So combined, these projects that were just leased are going to generate about 3 gigawatts of power. But when you look at overall land leasing, federal land leasing, renewable energy is starting to gain, but it is still, tiny compared to the amount of money that's raised through the leasing to coal, oil, and gas on federal lands. They're anticipating 2023 will see about $10 billion raised from the fossil fuel leases. A recent poll by Pew Research Center has found that there is widespread support for renewable energy amongst the American public, with the caveat that they don't want to see fossil fuels restricted or done away with. So when you look at the numbers, 74% say they support the United States being involved in international efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. About 67% support the promotion of renewable energy over fossil fuels. 61% support zero emission goals by 2040. And when you get into some very specific items, their support is even higher. For example, 89% say they support efforts to plant 1 trillion trees to offset carbon emissions. 85% say that oil and gas companies should pay to stop leaks in their own facilities. I wonder about the other 15% on that one, what they're thinking. But when you start talking about, are we going to eliminate fossil fuels, then the support falls away pretty dramatically. About 35% said we should never stop using fossil fuels, forever and ever, amen. 60% oppose the phasing out of gasoline-powered cars and trucks. 73% of Republicans who were polled on this say they're upset by the proposal or by the thought of getting rid of gasoline-powered vehicles. And 51% oppose requiring that all new buildings be fully electric. We're starting to see that being a thing in a lot of different states. It's trying to phase out the use of natural gas within building structures. Job outlook for energy sector in total came out, and jobs in the energy sector grew in 2022 by about 3.8%. Renewable energy, of course, led the way on that. And just so you're aware how the government defines renewables, it is solar, wind, hydro, battery systems, and then we get into grid development. So when they're talking about enhancing the efficiency of the grid, and nuclear. Nuclear is thrown in there as well. Well, the renewable energy added about 114,000 new jobs in 2022. Now that it accounts for about 84% of all of the new energy jobs that were produced in 2022. Oil and gas recovered 109,000 jobs in 2022, but they're still below where they were pre-pandemic employment levels. So there were a lot of jobs lost during the COVID pandemic, and they're recovering, but they're not quite back where they had been. Coal lost about 7,000 jobs. Well, that represents about 9% of the workforce in coal. And consumption of coal nationwide dropped about 25% in 2022. Surprising, at least surprising to me, were the top three states. Well, the first state wasn't surprising. California added 13,000 new clean energy jobs, but West Virginia was number 2, adding 7,000 new clean energy jobs. And Texas came in third at 5,100 clean energy jobs. And it's fascinating to me that West Virginia currently, of course, we think of that as coal mining region. Well, within the state of West Virginia, only about 12,000 people are employed in the coal industry, but about 36,000 are employed in the clean energy industry. So 3 times as many people work in clean energy than in coal, even in West Virginia. And that's the news from the solar industry for this week. Did anybody have anything they wanted to add to that? Any news you ran across? Give you just a second. Okay, if you come up with something, just feel free to interrupt me. A couple of people sent me some emails prior to this meeting to bring up a little bit of discussion on this, and maybe you can chime in if you've been getting hit with some of this. We've been seeing the investment, investor-owned utilities. The big utilities like AEP, those kind, Duke Energy, they have been transitioning with their net metering policies, going away from, the meter runs forward, the meter runs backwards, and they're going to what they refer to as the avoided cost compensation, which basically is they charge you retail, they pay you wholesale. That's the model they're moving towards, which in most situations ends up being you're paying them almost 20 cents a kilowatt hour, and they're paying you 6, maybe 7 cents a kilowatt hour. This has led a lot of people to start looking at using batteries for self-consumption, for example. So why would I sell it to the utility for 6 cents when I have to buy for 20? So I'll just store it and use it on site. Well, now the co-ops and the municipals that have largely been excluded from the net metering rules because they're nonprofits for the most part, and they're exempt from the state legislature net metering rules. Well, they're getting into the act now as well. They've always been a little bit behind the time. So I know I got some indication there from Pennsylvania, where one of the co-ops is going to the, avoided cost market, where they're saying, okay, you're going to pay us wholesale, retail, we're going to pay you wholesale. And a lot of the co-ops, especially here in Ohio, but I think it was the same in Pennsylvania, they've entered into some really bad, really dumb long-term purchasing agreements with coal power plants. Like here, it's Buckeye Power. They're almost exclusively coal. And so the costs keep escalating and escalating and escalating. And because of their dumb decisions, they're then trying to make sure nobody leaves because it costs some money. Then Bowling Green, apparently a couple of years ago, they started tacking on anti-solar surcharges. They were throwing out $1 per kilowatt if you have a solar array each month, escalating $1 per kilowatt each year until a maximum of $4 per kilowatt as a monthly charge, because you're being bad by having solar. So if you have say an 8 kW system on your home, right now you could be paying as much as $32 or no, my math, $32 a month extra as a tack on just because you're using solar. So those are some of the pushbacks we're beginning to see on the renewable energy front. And as I always like to say, it's that old Gandhi quote of first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they attack you, and then you win. The utilities are in attack mode now because they're seeing renewable energy as an existentialist threat to their business model. And it is, because their business model is antiquated, and they've got to be the ones who change. They're going to fight the change. They're going to lose that battle, and they're going to blame whoever they want to blame. But it really is because they're not adapting to a changing marketplace. Okay, anybody else have anything they want to bring up that came to mind while I was rambling on about those two items? I think, yeah, Eric, you had sent me that thing in Pennsylvania. What's your perspective on it?
Well, initially when they set up the contract, they were already setting it up as I would pay full price, like it's 13 cents a kilowatt hour for us. And they would compensate me for extra kilowatt hours at true up at about 4 or 5 cents. Not a big deal. I'm not concerned about that. My concern was the line that says we will no longer allow aggregation of kilowatt hours to other accounts. When I set this up, I have 2 households. One where I have the field where I put up the ground mount array, which is a rental, but I pay the electric bill. And then my other home, which is about a quarter mile away, that I do not have room to put up a solar array. And of course, this is the home that I was trying to net meter as well. So they allowed me to net meter both, but now they're saying no longer aggregation. So I'm not going to be able to get any credits down here that I sized the array for. So is that going to put me producing more than what is allowed for that? There's just a lot of things. And the other point, that it's unfair to other people, other customers who don't have solar, that they're going to bear the brunt of these new electrical charges. They're the ones raising the rates. I'm providing them free electricity. So I need it to make sense to me, and I need to know why they're no longer going to allow aggregation, because that's going to shoot me in the foot.
Yeah, I did see that they're saying they're giving you like a 5-year grace period on that, but it doesn't make any sense. All the studies that have been put out there show that up to a point, and you're nowhere close to that point, having these distributed systems put on the grid actually reduces the operating cost of the utility, because the time that you're sending power back is peak consumption periods where they have to pay, the higher than normal rates to purchase their power. So it is not a true statement. They may believe it's true because they get these, Trumpy ideas or whatever, where it really is just this kind of, we don't like it. And I don't know if you've ever attended your co-ops meetings, but at least if your co-op is like our co-op, the guys who run it are not exactly the brightest bulbs in the package, I mean, and it would be worthwhile going there and raising this as an objection and saying, listen, you guys need to change with the times. This is the studies that show that it actually helps out. You're probably not going to get anywhere, but squeaky wheel and all that. The aggregation thing makes 0 sense. I mean, that's just trying to throw roadblocks into the the growth of solar. So,
My contract says that I can aggregate, and it says nothing, there's no clause there that says that can no longer be valid. They say they can terminate the contract, either party can with 30 days notice, but that means disconnection from said service. And it's like,
yeah,
it doesn't make sense to me. And I think, like you're saying, our local co-ops do not have much experience with solar or AES. And I think the bigwigs somewhere else are saying, this is unfair to the other customers. And they're saying, this is unfair to the other customers. And they do not understand it.
yeah. My guess is they're getting pushback from their supplier.
Right.
I don't know who their supplier is. I think you said it was like Prairie Energy or something like that.
It's Allegheny Power.
Allegheny. Well, here in Ohio, it's Buckeye Power, and it is probably the worst run company on the face of the planet. And they've made one stupid decision after another. They decided to go all in on coal when every other utility was saying coal is a bad investment. And it's turned out that the price of coal has tripled. So the cost of their electricity has gone up. And, so now they're in trouble. And the utilities or the co-ops are in trouble because oftentimes they've entered into 10-year supplier agreements with these companies, and so they can't even kind of get out of it. So it's really frustrating. Somebody in the chat had raised that said their co-op meeting is tonight. What should be brought up? I would go in there and just be an advocate for solar and say, maybe point out that you're willing to pay the cost associated with bringing transmission lines to your home, because that's a real cost and it's a fair cost. But they need to demonstrate that it is in fact the cost. And if it is the cost, then there's a cost associated with it for all customers. So why is the solar customer being singled out as the negative? I mean, I've had arguments with our local co-op many times where they say, it costs us X number of dollars. They don't have a dollar figure, but it costs us money to bring the lines to your home. Say, fine, you charge me that. You charge everybody that in an access fee. Well, we don't charge 100% of it. We do make extra out of our profits from selling power. Said, so why are you misallocating the costs associated with the service you're provided? Why don't you just simply say, this is what we charge for power, this is what we charge for access, regardless of how much power you use, and that way solar is treated completely as agnostic. It's just that you're using less power, but you're still paying them what it costs for them to deliver the lines to you. That's thinking that's outside of their brain case. But what all of these policies are doing is basically encouraging all of us to say, you know what, at some point we don't need the utility. Cost of a standalone system begins to approach what it costs for us to purchase power from the grid. And so you're just making it so that we're going to disconnect. And especially when you start seeing that you can use your EV as a battery backup for extreme cases. And, so they're basically seeding this, seeding their own demise, but they don't seem to have the long-term vision to deal with that. But my guess is your contract, unless there's a little stipulation in the bottom of it that says we can change the rules at any time we feel like it, and there's nothing you can do about it, you probably have a good argument. But these are supposed to be member-owned things. So if you raise a fuss in front of everybody else and say, you're saying that basically as the owner of this company, I have no rights, where do you get off on that? And hopefully some of your libertarian neighbors will stand up and cheer. So anybody else have anything to add regarding what trials and tribulations they're getting from their utilities?
We've had we went to one of the board meetings for the local rural electric, and they were shocked that a member would want to participate. I mean, it had been probably decades. At least it was beyond their memory that any member had actually joined them at a board meeting, and they really took it seriously. It was a shock. So just showing up and asking the questions at a board meeting, it's quite eye-opening.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Well, I mean, our co-op has a couple of annual meetings, I think maybe two, where they serve hot dogs and they're in a high school gymnasium and they try and tell you, what they're up to. And I think they're pretty open about it. And the folks that I've dealt with, certainly the linemen, are good. They're nice folks. And I had a long discussion with one recently. He's very concerned that they're starting to shut down all of these coal power plants nationwide without adequately setting up replacement. He's fine with solar. It's just that he's concerned that the supply base is unstable because the powers that be are shutting things down faster than they can replace them. And that's a valid concern. It's good that he's thinking those things through. All right, well, let me jump in. And again, I'll encourage anybody to interrupt as I move forward, but the announcements, all of the webinars, there's a whole slew of them. And as I've mentioned before, on these, rather than me trying to give you links, which are very cumbersome and you wouldn't be able to write them down anyway, I'm trying to give you who's putting them on, what the title is, and you can just Google it. So July 11th, that's today, actually, 2:00, there's one on the workforce training. That's a discussion from IREC. There's another one at 2 today on the N-type TOP con versus PERC solar panels. If you really want to get into the weeds on that, that's from Solar Power World. For Aurora Solar on July 12th is having one on how to qualify a customer. So that's a nice little webinar there if you're into sales. Transforming the Future of Electricity, that's on July 12th at 2 p.m. from Utility Dive. Overcoming, there's apparently going to be some issues with distributed energy resources interconnecting in the Northeast. There are issues all around, but these are specific. So there's one coming from Renewable Energy World on July 13th, 1 p.m. All of these times are Eastern time. Optimizing reliability of your systems. This is a July 13th webinar as well. Then there's one on using helioscope. That's a solar design. It's probably one of the more popular ones, design software. So if you want to see how that works from Aurora Solar, that one's at 2 p.m. on July 13th. Updates on UL 3741 and CPS rapid shutdown. I think this is a product specific type webinar on CPS if you're using their products. That's on July 20th. Then NEP, this is another product specific webinar on three-phase microinverters. That's on the 25th. Then Solar United Neighbors is having one on July 26th at 8 p.m. This is on nonprofits and solar. So I assume they're going to go over a lot of the new incentives and how that works should nonprofits want to put solar on their facilities. And then there's one on energy communities. This again is a follow-up to the the Inflation Reduction Act. 27th, energy communities are those communities that have in the past been dependent upon fossil fuels. So a certain percentage of the population has worked in that industry, or they are within a population region, a census tract where there was a coal power plant that was shut down, or one that was immediately adjacent. So this is telling you about some of those rules and requirements. This particular one may be appealing to a lot of folks out there navigating 690. 690, the NEC 690, of course, is the section on solar. So my assumption is they're going to be talking about what are some of the changes that occurred in 690 in the latest revision of the code. That's on July 27th. Then there's one on three-phase quad microinverters. So microinverters that connect up to 4 panels. That's on August 2nd. So a lot of these, and they're starting to get very product specific on some of them, but those are the webinars, at least that crossed my desk, that I'm sharing with you there. All right, then another thing that just came out this week, which I thought would be a good opportunity for us to touch base on it, is the state of the solar market. Wood Mackenzie has produced these reports pretty much like twice a year, I think, with SEIA, the Solar Energy Industries Association. So the new report has just come out. You can purchase these reports or you can get the executive summary. And so I thought I'd go over what really is happening, at least according to Wood Mackenzie. If you want to get the executive summary, you can download that and just look, go to U.S. Solar Market Insight, Wood Mackenzie, you'll find it. So some of the sort of bullet points in Q1 of 2023 versus Q1 of 2022, we saw a 47% increase in the solar installations. It's the best first quarter in the history of the industry. And it has been led in large part, it's a little bit exaggerated because there were a number of delayed utility. A lot of it was supply chain delays. And so a lot of this is working its way through the market. So this pent-up demand all hit at the same time. And so we've seen a bit of a spike here. Solar did account for about 54% of all of the new electric generating capacity on the grid. This here is showing basically how that mix has changed over the years. So if you jump back, let's jump back 10 years, 2013, 48% was natural gas of all of the new electricity. Now we're in 2023, 24%. So natural gas installation as a percentage has been cut in half in the last 10 years, whereas solar has more than doubled from 25% to 54%. Wind still doing well. I guess 2013 was a bit of a anomalous year on wind. And then actually 2013 was really the last year of any significant coal installation. So that's interesting to see, is that coal really has not been part of the mix for 10 years as far as new installations, and much of the current infrastructure is being removed, being retired, and we're just seeing that accelerating. So really, if you add all of these up, I think the 5% we're looking at, a lot of that is battery based grid storage. So really, we're looking at about 75% of all of the new installation on the grid coming from renewable energy so far this year. The IRA has spurred a lot of domestic manufacturing, and the capacity is anticipated to grow and grow pretty dramatically. We're starting to see solar cell manufacturing coming back to the United States. It's still small relative to the amount that's manufactured in China, and then module manufacturing. I was talking over the weekend to a guy who works for basically the largest solar company in Ohio. And we were talking about the American-made incentive, the 10% tax credit. And he was still kind of scoffing, saying, good luck finding American-made product, because you're just not going to get it. So when you're talking to folks about the incentive there for American-made product, I think it's safe to say that it'll be well into 2024 before we start having significant amounts of American-made product, at least enough to warrant those folks qualifying for the 10% discount. But as the announcement was made today about Enphase starting to produce, but my guess is starting to produce and actually being able to get are two completely different things. So we're going to hear a lot of announcements, but very little access to product until that all works its way through. We're also seeing projections that there will be very strong growth of overall solar over the next 5 years. In fact, they're anticipating, when you see that about 236 gigawatts of solar capacity is anticipated to come online over the next 5 years. Well, when you see that we currently have about 142 gigawatts, you're really looking at tripling the capacity of solar over the next 5 years. It's hard to imagine that much solar coming online that quickly. But as this diagram indicates, it really is focused in the utility scale area. And a lot of those projects are very large, quite large. And they're not what we traditionally think of as solar installation, like those of us who say, okay, I'm going to go out and design a system. It's usually where large developers, they work with various unions, they bring in day laborers, people who are going to be working on, okay, your job is to carry a solar panel and stick it on a rack, and you do that for 8 hours, for the next 3 months, that kind of job. So not one I'm really keen about. But when you get down into the commercial and the residential, that's going to be pretty steady growth and good opportunities for small businesses as well as even larger businesses. So where is a lot of this growth taking place? Well, some of the top ones there are not that surprising. I guess Florida moving from number 3 to number 1 is a bit surprising. So Florida is really where a lot of the activity is currently happening. California has dropped off a bit. There's, of course, a large installed base. So you would see that as these markets get a bit saturated, they're going to fall in comparison with other places that have not seen the development growing that well. But I think net metering 3.0 that took place in California that reduced the compensation made it a little less desirable. Texas remains very strong as far as solar. I think a lot of that is because of a very unreliable grid. And so a lot of folks are sort of taking their power needs into their own hands. Plus, the utilities within Texas are investing a lot in solar as well. Colorado, that's big jump up from 26th to number 4. Alabama was surprising, right? 52nd all the way up to 5th. Seems to me, and I tried to look this up, I didn't find it, but I recall a big installation from Google, if I remember right. So it might be a bit of an anomaly where they just got a big install there. North Carolina has always been strong. New York, of course. Idaho, that's another surprising one. So we're starting to see that some of these areas that have not been widely developed, Tennessee, for example, South Carolina, Montana, those are starting to get some big projects that are pushing. So solar is becoming much more widespread in those locations. At the same time that I think we're seeing an increase of politicization within solar. So it's kind of weird. I think we're in for weird times, not just in the solar industry, but in general. Okay, so what are we looking at as far as the growth rate? Well, Q1 over Q1 last year, we saw some pretty dramatic increases in installation. We saw 30% bump in residential solar installs quarter over quarter. Commercial, 27%. Community solar, which for a long while was sort of the darling child of all of these installs, where if you can't afford to put solar on or if your home is not suitable for solar, you can buy into a larger project and then allocate some of that power to your home. I think we're starting to see some of that less appealing. Largely those areas where it is into the law, they're part of the growth that we've seen in recent years. And there haven't really been any additional states throwing this up because the utilities are not keen to do this. So it really requires state legislation to make this happen. In Ohio, we're sort of dipping our toe in the water. There's a couple of test projects to see if this thing works. Of course it works, but we're going to pretend like we don't know. And that's going to take a few years to work through. Utility, of course, was just huge, 66% quarter over quarter. And that was largely driven by supply chain issues. So as I said before, there was a lot of pent-up demand, and we're seeing that now work its way through the system. And then, of course, what everybody's always concerned about is the cost structure. How are we doing on costs? We would anticipate that as the supply chain issues that drove up the cost are being worked through, we're going to start to see these costs decline, but we're not there yet. So, prices go up quickly, they come down very slowly. So what we are seeing is about a 7% increase year on year. So last year for residential systems, the average cost of a system nationwide was about $3.07 per watt. Now we're seeing about $3.28 per watt. I'm sure it seemed to me it bumped up a little bit, came down a little bit, but we're still ahead. And this chart is kind of interesting. It does break it down a little bit further to tell you where are all of these costs coming into play. But just looking at the top two there, the green and the pink at the top, you can see that a fair amount of the costs there, probably almost 40 to 50%, is overhead, margin, and customer acquisition. So those are clearly, basically, it's profits, administration, and salespeople. Then you get into some permitting costs that are pretty high. Really comes down to the cost of install for labor, and product is only about half the cost of the system. The soft costs are going to continue to be stubborn. Commercial costs actually came down just a little bit, from $1.65 on average down to about $1.63. But then we did see utility scale costs creeping up just a little bit, again in the 7% range there, just right at about $1 a watt installed for these systems. So I think if I was betting on this, you would start to see that as a lot of the product is made in America, the costs are going to be going up a bit, but then the incentives are there to compensate for that. We saw for many, many years China rushing towards lowest cost production, and I think the industry got a little bit drunk on that. We're used to product getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. I think those days, at least for the next until the next big technological breakthrough, are kind of over. I think we'll see more of a price stability as costs go up, but volume goes up, which then tends to push the costs down, which then tends to even them out. But the overall cost of the systems, at least right now, is going to be less and less, because the Inflation Reduction Act has essentially 40–50% tax credits built into it. So for commercial structures, for commercial installations anyway, those incentives are pretty dramatic. And of course, the 30% for residential is in place for 10 years. So that's going to make everything a little bit cheaper, at least for those people who pay taxes. All right. And the last item here was the storage market. And it was kind of interesting because, again, the storage market was growing very dramatically. And then I think we saw a bit of a slowdown, at least at the utility level. We are seeing growth within the commercial and the residential level. A lot of this, at least at the residential level, is being driven by net metering policies, time of day pricing policies. There's unreliable grids. So there are a few states like Texas, California, Puerto Rico that are really pushing people to install batteries because their grid has been so unreliable. But at the utility scale, we've seen an actual decline in storage deployment. And if you look below on that chart, you're going to see that some of that, not 100% of it, but pretty close to it, is largely because of interconnection delays. So we're starting to see once again, the impact of a dysfunctional regulatory system for the interconnection of resources at the utility scale. All right, so that's kind of where we're at within the solar industry. Does anybody have any comments or anything to add, or something completely different that you want to throw out there to the good of the cause here? Give you just a second. All right, if I don't hear anything, I'm going to call it.
Hey, Jay, real quick.
Yeah.
On the American made, it doesn't have to be the whole system has to be American made. So even though we might not be able to get American made panels, if we buy an American made inverter, racking system, conduit, all of that stuff, we can still apply for the credit for whatever components are American made. Is that not right?
Right. Yes. There's two separate parts of that, though. One is for the metal stuff, you know, like if you're talking about racking systems and the like, I think that has to be 100% American made. But the others, it's an escalating percentage over time. So I don't remember, it's like 40% or something in the early stages, and then it accelerates. But yeah, if you can get them, and I still haven't gotten confirmation. These are for commercial installs, all of those add-ons of the tax incentives. But I did hear a webinar from, might have even been from Enphase, where they were speculating that American made extended to residential. So, but I have never been able to find anybody to confirm that or even address it in documentation.
Yeah, I'll look for it, but my understanding was it applied to residential as well.
Yeah, I can't find that in the descriptions from the, yeah. So if you can do that and report back, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, no, I've been working a lot on this area for this and for the charitable, where you get money back actually from the IRS if you're a charitable organization. So I'll look at that as I'm working on it. I'll give you whatever I find.
Have you processed any where anybody has actually gotten money back?
Have not yet. In fact, plan to do so for this urban farm that we've been doing a project for. So that'll be our first attempt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been involved with the REAP grant money. So for commercial REAP grants, or the Rural Electrification for America program, which is run through the USDA, the Department of Agriculture. They got a whole bunch more money. And so they've elevated their 25% grants up to as much as 50%. And they've gone from semi-annual application periods to quarterly application periods. And at least here in Ohio, it's thrown them a little bit into chaos, you know, administratively. They're still trying to interpret, you know, how things work and how, you know, and I actually got a REAP grant here for our offices, and the paperwork involved, which every document says, because of the paperwork simplification process, this document's only going to take you 15 minutes, but there's 3,000 of them that I have to fill out about not lobbying and not discriminating and all of that. And so for, you know, it gets really weird because I just sent to them a question for clarification. You're supposed to send semi-annual update reports until the funds are fully dispersed, but the funds were generated on April 1st, and it says the reports are due July, you know, as the semi-annual, but then there's another place where it has a box that says September, but they've checked both of the boxes. So I'm saying, okay, is it 6 months after you get the grant, or is it 6 months calendar year? How are these reports required? And then we were also getting into some assessment issues, like, let's say you have a business on a farm, but you also live there. Well, can you allocate a percentage of the activity like you would do on your taxes and say, okay, I'm 51% business, 49%. So the grant, you know, for electric usage. They used to say, yeah, now they're basically saying nope, unless you got a separate meter, we don't even want to hear about it. You know, we want this clean. We want it, if it's a business, yeah, if you live there, you've got a meter for your home, you've got a meter for your business. And that's not always easy with these businesses. So especially since it's geared towards agriculture, and almost every agricultural small farm, they live there. You know, now they might have a grain drying thing or something like that separately metered, but not always is things like outdoor lighting, or the barn is just hooked up as a sub meter or something like that. And do they want to go to the expense of putting in a separate meter? So everything's in flux. Everything is being changed. It's all good, you know, as far as these incentives, but dealing with the government can be certainly frustrating. So,
did you finish your install at your place?
no. Well, yes and no. We got it all installed. I mean, we got the solar array up, and that was looks really sharp. We did a great job. Must pat ourselves on the back. But then we started installing all of the equipment. I've been working with Jimmy Braswell here in Marietta, and he's the electrician, but he's also starting up a solar install company. So we really wanted to take this one as a test case on how to hook everything up to make it all work. And then they all went on vacation. So it's all the equipment's hung, just not all of the wire is connected down there, but I'm not in that big of a hurry on it. So I'll report back when we have it all up and running. And if we blow it up, I'll let you guys know. The one part of it that was very confusing had to do with the load management aspect. Because with Enphase, you have now with their systems, you've got the combiner box, which you've had for a while, where you bring in your solar, you can bring in your battery there, you can bring in a generator there if you want to. These then get connected up to the smart switch. Well, the smart switch is now, you know, it's quite a big, heavy duty, complicated piece of equipment. But then if you're running it without batteries, which we're currently doing, then you need to do a load management. It's another box. And essentially you can take 2 double pole circuits or 4 single pole circuits in your service panel, or actually you should set up as a sub panel, and then prioritize those. So that connects into your smart switch, and then basically says how much power is available from the array, how much power are you using, and if you've got more use than available power, I'm going to shut these circuits off based on how you've told me to prioritize them. So that was a little bit confusing trying to figure out how that all went together, but I think we've got that one in hand. Okay. Anybody else have anything to bring up? All right. Well, hearing none, I appreciate you guys' attendance, and we'll see you guys next week. All right. Take care.